There are monsters that roar. There are monsters that hoard gold. And then there is the kind of monster people in the Old North feared most, because he did not look like a monster until it was too late. He looked like weather on a mountain. He looked like a man who had lived long enough to forget that other men die. This giant kept his heart outside his body, not as poetry, as policy. While his heart stayed hidden, no sword in any kingdom could end him, and any prince who came against him with courage alone came home as stone. A king once sent 6 sons to win the giant's daughter and break his hold on the border hills. 5 never returned as men. The 6th had to learn where a coward keeps the one thing he is not willing to guard with his chest. The king's sons rode out in the spring when the fjords were pale blue and the birchwoods still held last year's leaves under the new green. They were brave the way princes are brave when a whole country is watching and no one has yet shown them what bravery costs. The giant met them on a pass above the timberline. He did not argue. He did not lecture. He struck once with a staff like the trunk of an oak, and the 5 eldest became stone where they stood, still wearing their cloaks, still holding their reins, their faces caught between anger and surprise as if the mountain had taken a photograph of their last second. The youngest saw it and turned his horse. He was not praised for running. He was not forgiven for it either, but he was alive, and alive was the only tool left in the kingdom. He came back to his father ashamed and shaking. The court wanted a funeral for 5 living statues. The king wanted a victory. He looked at his last son and said, "You will go again, and this time you will not return until you have done what your brothers could not, or you will not return at all." The youngest took a boat, then a path, then a road that grew narrower until it was only a goat track above a black lake. An old woman at a croft door gave him bread and a word. "If you would beat a man who hides his heart," she said, "do not look where men keep pride. Look where men keep fear. And fear always hides deeper than pride." That night, the north wind found him on a ridge and tested him the way winds test travelers, with cold and with offers. When the prince endured, the wind gave him a cloak that made him hard to see, and a counsel the prince wrote inside his memory. Ask the giant where he keeps what he cannot afford to lose. The giant's hall sat in a cleft of rock like a bad tooth in a jawbone of stone. Smoke rose from it without hurry. Inside, the 5 stone brothers stood along the wall as trophies, and the giant sat on a bench hewn from a single pine, eating meat off a bone with teeth too, even for an animal. The youngest entered wearing the wind's cloak and stood where the fire could not read his face. The giant boasted, because giants always boast when they think no one in the room can hurt them. He said his heart was not in his breast. He said it was hidden where no prince would think to dig. In an egg, he said. Inside a duck, on an island you cannot reach. In a church you cannot enter. In a well you cannot drain. He laughed, and the laugh rolled through the hall like a barrel downstairs. The youngest did not laugh. He memorized the order of the hiding places the way you memorize the steps of a house when you mean to come back in the dark. The sea around the island was the color of slate when storms are thinking about arriving. The church stood alone on the rock, small and stubborn, with a bell that had not rung in years and a well beside the door green with old moss. The youngest came by boat at dawn. He tied the rope where the waves would not steal it and climbed the wet stone with salt on his lips and fear sitting in his stomach like a stone of its own. In the well, when he had lowered the bucket and raised it again, a duck floated up as if the water had been keeping it for him. He caught the duck. He held it firm without cruelty. Inside the bird, when he broke the egg at last, there was no yolk. There was only a heart the size of a walnut beating against his palm with a rage that was not his own. Far away in the mountain hall, the giant stood up from his bench as if someone had pulled a nail from the world. He clutched at air. He roared, and the roar was suddenly a man's roar, not a weather system pretending to be a man. The youngest crushed the egg between his hands. The heart burst. The giant fell. Stone became flesh again along the wall, as if a spell had simply lost an argument it had been winning for too long. The 5 brothers coughed and staggered and did not understand at first that they were allowed to move. No one in that hall spoke for a long time. Then the eldest brother looked at the youngest and saw not a coward who ran, but a man who had gone where running could not help and come back with the one thing the giant never thought anyone would find. They rode home in a line, 6 brothers where there had been one, and the country along the fjord came out to watch the way countries do when they have been holding their breath without knowing it. The king wept without hiding it. He had prepared words for a funeral and had to spend them on a feast instead. The youngest did not ask to be praised above the others. He had learned on the island that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to hold something terrifying in your hands and not drop it until the work is done. So when you hear of giants with no hearts, remember this. The heart was never missing. It was only relocated, and relocation is a kind of hope for every coward who believes no one will look that far. This was Forgotten Fables. This was the giant with no heart, from the folk traditions of Norway. Follow the channel when you want the next story the loud world forgot.